Nickel plating isn't some arcane craft locked behind factory walls or costly workshops. Imagine sitting at a simple workbench, a glass jar filled with nothing more exotic than vinegar and table salt, and watching as a dull metal surface transforms with a gleaming nickel coating. This isn't a scene from a futuristic lab or a heavy industrial plant. It's a process used to protect warships and precision surgical tools, yet completely achievable at home for mere dollars. The long-held belief that nickel plating demands expensive, complex machinery is a myth that collapses the moment you see this in action. Professional plating shops charge thousands of dollars for work that can be replicated with household items and a modest power source. Even starter kits on the market go for around $400, a steep price for something that costs almost nothing to pull off independently. This vast price gap isn't accidental. It's engineered. The industry intentionally keeps the true simplicity of electroplating hidden to justify their exorbitant fees and maintain control over the market. The roots of this hidden truth stretch back nearly 2 centuries. In 1838, Swiss chemist Auguste Verneuil discovered that by immersing 2 metals in a conductive solution and applying a mild electric current, metal ions from one object would migrate and bond onto the surface of another. This breakthrough was not a revelation locked away in white coats and research labs. It was an elegant, simple method anyone armed with basic knowledge and ingredients could execute. This discrepancy reveals more than just a pricing problem. It exposes a carefully constructed system where complexity is weaponized to extract profit from a process that should never have been exclusive. The real cost to consumers isn't just financial, it's knowledge that has been withheld, opportunities blocked, and autonomy stripped away. Understanding this shakes the foundation of what many believe about wealth and consumption in technical trades. The same principle applies to countless fields where layered myths inflate value and lock everyday people out of potential self-sufficiency. This moment, this revelation, demands we reconsider the effort we've invested in chasing costly expertise and ask how much of it was built on outdated or manipulated information. As you absorb this, prepare to see how this pattern repeats across industries and how recognizing these constructed barriers is the first step to reclaiming control over resources and knowledge. What seems complex often isn't. It's simply been made to look that way. This disclosure isn't just about nickel plating. It's a challenge to revisit every assumption about value, skill, and cost. The real shock is not that nickel plating works. It is how little it actually needs to work. Once you strip away the branding, the factory language, and the glossy brochures, you are left with a process that is built on basic chemistry, not magic. Think about what that means in practice. A thin layer of nickel can change the surface of an object, make it more durable, improve the finish, and solve problems that would otherwise force a manufacturer to replace the whole part. For industry, that is enormously valuable. And here's where the numbers start to expose the gap. Professional plating services can vary greatly, often ranging from $40 to $400 depending on the size, shape, and complexity of the object. That is the official low end. But in the real world, once the part gets bigger, more awkward, or more specialized, the bill rises fast. You're no longer paying for nickel alone. That is why the historical detail matters. When electroplating moved from a lab experiment into widespread industrial use, it did not become expensive because the science became harder. It became expensive because the market around it did. The technique itself stayed rooted in simple scientific principles, but the service wrapped around it turned into a pricing machine. But the math keeps pushing back. If a thin metal layer is the final goal, and the basic mechanism was understood long ago, then the real barrier is not knowledge in the abstract. It is access, packaging, and cost. That is exactly why the industry has so much to gain from making the process feel out of reach. Professional plating can cost anywhere from $40 to $400, depending on the size and complexity of the object. This steep price isn't just about pricey materials, it reflects the heavy investments in specialized machines, chemicals, and skilled technicians needed to meet industrial standards. For most people, these costs seem locked in. This is simply how much it takes to get quality plating. Yet here's the catch. The exact same nickel plating results can be achieved at home for a few dollars. Scientific validation seals the case. A study from the Journal of the Electrochemical Society found that coatings made through home electroplating with acetic acid reach about 92% of the density of industrial methods. That's not a negligible gap. It proves DIY plating isn't a makeshift hack, but a formidable alternative. The industry's expensive facade hides the truth. Plating is a simple chemical process anyone can access with minimal training and investment. While professionals built entire business models, convinced everyone needs them, beneath that runs a basic recipe and a power supply. From the perspective of the average consumer, the real cost isn't materials or science. It's the premium extracted for branding, proprietary processes, and bespoke service. The system preys on a lack of awareness, elevating complexity to enforce dependence. Meanwhile, this knowledge remains confined, buried by the market players, positioning plating as technical wizardry rather than a straightforward procedure. Understanding this value stratification reframes the narrative. Effort and skill are not the true sources of value here, but rather who controls the gatekeepers and the storytelling around the process. Recognizing that electroplating can be performed with household items challenges the long-standing narrative shaping the market. It uncovers a structural transfer of wealth away from DIY practitioners to service providers, who reap disproportionate returns by monopolizing access to what amounts to a basic science experiment. With this insight, the power dynamics become transparent. Anyone willing to learn and act can bypass costly intermediaries. The true ownership of wealth in this ecosystem belongs neither to the gold-plated factories nor the chemical suppliers, but to the controlled narrative that keeps knowledge hidden and prices inflated. This is the moment where the veneer cracks, revealing the system where consumers are systematically extracted from real ownership and agency over their own assets. If you want this to stop being theory, forget the big workshop, the polished gear, the expensive setup. The first useful move is almost insultingly small. Put a spoon, a key, or a dull screw on your table and strip it down to one job. Clean it until your fingers are bored. Degrease it, dry it completely. That matters more than the glamour of the process, because plating fails first, where people get lazy. Not in the chemistry, in the prep. Then use the cheapest practical version of the setup. A glass jar, white vinegar, table salt, a battery, 2 wires. Nothing fancy. The object goes on the negative side, the nickel piece on the positive side, and both sit in the solution without touching. That is the part people keep trying to overcomplicate. They imagine hidden machinery, secret chambers, industrial smoke. In reality, the whole thing collapses into a few quiet steps at a kitchen table. And this is exactly why the method matters. A professional quote can run from $40 to $400, and for larger or more complex pieces, the number climbs fast enough to make the job feel out of reach. But once you understand the simplest version, the cost structure starts looking ridiculous. You're not paying for magic. You're paying for someone else's time, overhead, and the story that says this must be done for you. That story gets even weaker when you look at the result itself. Nickel is not just there to look shiny. A thin layer, just 2 microns thick, can reduce corrosion by as much as 87% compared with untreated metal. It also ranks around 4 on the Mohs hardness scale, which gives the surface real protection against wear, not just a cleaner appearance. So when you plate at home, the point is not decoration. The point is control over the surface before rust, friction, and time take it away. That is the part most people never get to see. Not the glossy ad, not the crowded shop floor, not the invoice padded with labor, turnaround time, and special handling. Just a metal surface, stripped down, protected, and sent back into the world with a new skin on it. And once you understand that, the whole story changes. The real advantage is not a miracle machine or a secret workshop. It is control. Control over when the work gets done, control over what it costs, and control over how much of your project gets sacrificed to someone else's markup. That is why the usual answer from the industry feels so heavy-handed. Keep the process complicated, keep the language technical, keep the customer guessing. If the average person believes nickel plating only belongs in a factory, then a $400 jar of chemicals can look normal. A $1,000 quote can sound justified. But the moment you see the same result forming on a bench in a glass jar with ordinary materials, the pricing logic starts to wobble. Not because the work is worthless, because the mystery around it was doing the selling. And this is where most people make the wrong move. They either freeze up and hand the job to a shop, or they chase the idea of doing everything perfectly the first time. Neither one is the point. The point is to stop being trapped by the biggest lie in the process. That access must be expensive, and that simple work must be treated like elite craft. Once that lie cracks, you can start thinking like someone who keeps options open, instead of someone who pays panic tax every time a part needs saving. The practical win is smaller than the myth, and that is exactly why it matters. You do not need a fantasy about turning into a master overnight. You need a way to keep a metal object from being lost to rust, wear, or replacement. You need enough confidence to preserve what already has value. That is a very different kind of wealth. It does not shout. It compounds. So if you take anything from this, take the exit, not from responsibility, but from dependence. Learn the process well enough to know when a shop is useful and when it is just expensive. Keep a small buffer. Keep your work reversible when possible.